We should talk about your Worlds run now, Papa, because you guys were deploying, as you said, your strategy was not merely to ape the other regions. You want to come up with something more unique. This is where we get to see some of the picks like Urgot, obviously a Blippo classic coming in for many years, but surprise picks like Nunu for Inspired. Obviously your performance was incredible. You nearly pulled off maybe the biggest upset in League of Legends history by almost beating Gen G in the quarterfinals. So walk us through how you guys approached like preparing for Worlds and then your diagnosis on how that tournament went for FlyQuest.
Yeah, I guess I never really thought about this to now, but because we kind of like took the approach of this like, you know, solution focus versus problem focus kind of approach to roster building, one of the parts that feels great about how I reflect on Worlds is that without any direction from me, that's how the squad kind of approached Worlds, is that they understand and diagnose the same thing that I think most teams should, and that if we just play meta matchups against teams from Korea and China, we're gonna, on balance, especially 3 out of 5 times, lose. Like that's our practice is so
Some would say
inferior.
some NA teams maybe still didn't get that memo, Papa. They'd still run on 10 plus years
Hey,
at this point in time, mate.
what can I say? But like with inferior practice and inferior training tools, however you want to like generalize it, like there's obviously a lot of things that are inferior about our ability to get good from North America. There is just a limiting factor. You know, that's not even getting into like talent density and all these other things there. So I think the thing that I love about our players is that with the hiring philosophy I had, and maybe I should have expected this, but a lot of our players are very much like, hey, I'm cooking this. I think it beats this meta thing that everyone is like telling me I have to play. Can I try it? And I think we have very inclusive kind of like, yes, let's try it approach. And one of the good things about having a good settled team culture is that if someone wants to play a wacky counter pick, let's say, for example, the Nunu counter pick into certain jungle champions, which we've been playing all the way through summer, there's actually like I think a dive episode where, no, it wasn't a dive episode. There was like the Blabbers episode of the Dom podcast of the Sack Down where like
Right.
Blabber leaks Nunu, but they bleep Nunu. It's right before
Right.
LCS finals because we
Okay.
were scrimming C9 and playing Nunu at that time. I forget the matchup, but we just had a matchup we thought Nunu was really good into. Um, there's no like we lost this game because like my jungler troll picked kind of like angle. Like everyone's very open minded to trying things. Everyone gets on the same page and knows why we're trying it, and then we bank it or we dismiss it after a couple of games. And I think coming into Worlds, we had quite a lot of stuff that we thought was good, and we had a pretty good understanding of when to use it and where to use it. Like if this is picked, that's the time to unleash this. If these three champions are first rounded with these bans, we can get away with this kind of thought process. And it's that kind of like problem solving that allowed us to kind of let Korean teams play champions that would be highly contested or picked away, knowing that we were going to have an information advantage and create like a new battlefield that they hadn't seen with a pick that we were confident in our read on. And of course, you can faceplant spectacularly taking that strategy, but if the logic is sound and if there's enough data put into it and the player's confident into it, that's just going to take you way further over any timeline than trying to just go with the conservative trading of picks with a top team from Korea if you're a North American team.
By the way, before we get to the Gen G series, I saw another thing that you said in the FM Korea AMA is that, first of all, like scrims actually throughout Worlds were very promising. Like you even implied, it's funny, people might think, well, Gen G looked a bit weaker. First of all, Gen G was the team on the Golden Road until summer finals. And then secondly, as you pointed out, actually based on scrims, you, if anything, wanted to be on the other side of the bracket. It was all the LPL teams you were beating. But a thing that people will always forget, Papa, because people always forget when you don't win the game, is that series against Hanwha Life. They only remember now, well, they had the Nunu game, and I guess they picked a silly. No, game one is just a normal meta draft, and the team fought back into that game, and that was like in a potentially winnable scenario. It was like an even game state. That was the one Hanwha won. Then you guys won game two. Like that, Hanwha Life were the LCK champions. Like there was more result. It wasn't just we almost beat Gen G. There was other things elsewhere that showed this was like it was. There was some consistency to the performance. It wasn't a one-off, right?
Definitely when it comes to an international tournament, scrim boot camp into playing the tournament and playing scrims during the tournament, I've never been part of a team like this, I think. And I can only speak for like anecdotal stuff from like, my coaches on previous teams, but
I've
crazy
known
thing
very few
about
Western teams that ever won scrims, put out with. Like, it's very rare.
I would say that from summer onwards, i.e., from week 1 of summer till literally being eliminated, we were getting better every week on stage and in scrims, and that's so fucking hard because I think
Oh,
Worlds is usually the reality check where you're like, oh shit, we're getting hands gapped by these other players. We were not getting hands gapped by anybody, but we were still obviously like, going 50-60%, being competitive in scrims. The scrim, I know people have talked about like how many Korean and Chinese teams we played in scrims. I know Nuke Duck kind of like gave a comment. That was a little bit of like a moment in time, but the way it worked is we got there 2 weeks early because if you're North American, you have to get out of North America as fast as possible because no one to scrim here. So we were in Europe a couple of weeks early, scrimming against mostly like European teams, mixed teams. By mixed, I mean like a McDonald's team. Like, hey, can you like put together 5 good players? Sometimes pro players on the team. Sometimes it's like tier 2 players.
those are
That's what
sometimes better than people realize. Well, those can be like real
Well,
competitive scrims, right?
yeah, we definitely had days where we went like 2-3 against like a McDonald's
Right.
lineup of like
Okay.
tier 2 players, and then the next day we beat T1 in scrims,
There
and you're
you
like,
go.
what does
Right.
this mean?
Sure.
And there was definitely like days like that. And McDonald's was actually one of our worst win rates somehow. But the
As
problem with
opposed to like
McDonald's
Red Bull
scrims is
gaming or
like
something, right?
when the McDonald's is not like, G2 Fnatic Fusion, when it's like actually like, up and coming tier 2 players who are like trying to get a look into LEC and things like that. You come in as like, LCS champions with pride. It's you look on the other side and you're like, who the fuck are these guys? You lose game 1 and then it's a bit of like, mental destruction. It's not
Yeah.
a mental boom, but it's like that's the part where suddenly egos come in a bit when they're like, wait,
Sure.
how could this happen? You overthink those scrims compared to the other ones. So I think that's why McDonald's was a little bit tough for us. But then as the tournament went on, like definitely like by the time we were like 2 days out from playing or whatever, we were obviously then scrimming a lot more Asian teams. And then as it's kind of talked about in the AMA, once we hit quarterfinals, there ain't nobody to scrim except Asian teams. And the fact I will never like I'm, a realist. Like, I'm not gonna come in and big up my team. Like, we can beat anyone. Like, you get browbeaten, right? Being involved in esports for a long time when you're on the West, you're kind of taught to know your place, and
Yes.
whether you're like an optimist or not, you kind of like think you know how things go. To have a week like that where we were, beating teams on the other side of the bracket in scrims with Seraphine mid and some of these other creative picks. Our Fiddlesticks win rate in scrims was extremely high too. It's like I was looking at it and I'm like, wait, the only thing I can take from these scrims is that I have to be confident coming in against Gen G. Like we thought Gen G and T1 were stylistically the hardest possible teams for us to face. So definitely we did not want to be facing T1. I think like LNG or something like that was what we were hoping for. But we had been fortunate in the, random Swiss draws before. So you can't be like, well, how could this happen? Like
Sure.
at some
Sure.
point that has to, the luck has to eventually be equalized, I guess, in those scenarios. I know you love the Swiss stages, Thorin. Big fan of Switzerland, but I just looked at it and I was like, wait, like there's no chance we're gonna get 3-0 fast tomorrow. And like to have that opinion as me, experienced person coming into a series against Gen G, who we think is actually the best team at the tournament, lets you know that a lot of fucking shit was going right in scrims. And my only like hope, like people like, what do you think's gonna happen? I was like, all I want is for us to win game 1 against Gen G, because I know that every fucking person who has watched League of Legends Pro in the last 5 years and goes on Twitter or has a friend is going to go to their friend and be like, holy shit, they might win.
That
Like
really was the
that's
response. I remember watching the series. All the talent were going crazy. Everyone, yeah.
I believe we now are the highest viewership game esports series by any North American team in the history
Would
of
make
esports.
sense. Yeah, I mean, you're up to 1. Yeah.
We're actually above the peak viewership of that series is 3.8 million. It's actually higher than like TL winning TI and things like that. Just
That's
because
more than
obviously,
Cloud9 winning the Boston Majors. Everything.
yeah,
Yeah, it's massive,
because
mate.
international League of Legends viewership
Yeah,
continues to go up. So
absolutely.
we wanted to create a moment. Obviously, like the team wanted to create a series, but from my side, I was like, let's make a moment here. Like we're
Sure.
fucking good. Let's show it. And even though like we didn't win that series, and like you don't get any real participation trophies for almost winning against Gen G, like obviously like 2 games against Gen G, 1 game against Hanwha Life, and a moment where everyone was chanting the name of FlyQuest and Brippo especially, That's a really special thing that will stick with me my whole life, let alone my esports career or FlyQuest
By
career.
the way, though, that's something else I thought you said that was quite interesting in the AMA is, look, I won't mention names, but I did think actually that NRG went out. They didn't need anyone else to. They gassed themselves up after that result. They made it sound like they had like fucking. You'd have thought they were the ones in the World's Finals where they talked about their World's run, right? First of all, in the AMA and this interview, you yourself have preemptive and acknowledged like we got a lucky draw, and you even said in the AMA, obviously you can't actually even have any expectations of Western team if you're even going to make top 8. Like you have to hope you get like the low probability chance that you get the super lucky draw. You got that, but also you even said that after I thought this was perfect. You said after the series lost to Gen G, you didn't come in and go, "Oh, guys, high fives, we almost did it." Oh, you actually did the sort of thing like let that sit with them, let them sort of realize, wait, the fact that we almost did it is actually the thing you have to focus on for next year. Sort of like you don't want to take too much, you don't want to do that thing of like, oh, it's a moral victory, because it's like you actually want the real victory, and the only way you sort of get that is if it actually does suck that you almost did it. And you have to sort of let the player feel that a bit, right?
Like, how many players from the West in the history of League of Legends can walk away from a best of 5 against a real, like, we're not talking about a fringe Asian team. We're talking about a fucking top Asian team and be like, fuck, we should have won. You know, like, whether it's we were up 2-1 and that means +1 equals victory, or like, you know, over the course of the series, I felt we played better. Like, whatever level of like reality is, I don't need to like audit that, but like wherever they're at, the fact that I needed them to come into the room and feel like the same as if they like lost a series to Dignitas in North America. And then you have to think about that and be like, wait, because removed from that moment, weeks later, you'll be like, fuck, like that was a thing that happened. That's amazing. Like you can like pat yourself on the back or like think about what that means in a larger context later. But in that moment, you've earned the right to feel like if I did a couple of things differently, I could have beat Gen G in a best of 5.
Yes.
And like I think that's what I kind of cautioned all the staff and everyone too, is like you want to be like, come on guys, it was a moral victory, but instead that moment of like genuine like, fuck, I'm a competitor and I didn't win today is like earning that. Like how many times will that happen? I hope that will be FlyQuest going forward. You know, that's the stand I want to hold us to, and that's why and a lot of this is downstream of me. Like I'm always thinking about, like, my brain is always like, how could this thing that's happening go wrong, and how can I like plan for the future or get the most out of this? You know, like I'm very much like that. But I think in general, when it comes to future planning, I never want to think multiple steps ahead. Just like right now, most of my thoughts are on, okay, we're running back the roster and coaching staff that has great points to it, but also the band-aids, the like the disagreements that we got past. There will be data points that will bring those up. There will be kind of like little cuts and raw moments that we need to like address going forward. And also the people that left the stage in France, you know, like 2 experienced players that were coming back into pro after like half a split or 1 year off, 2 rookies in the bot lane, and Quad coming back from pro and being promoted from NACL will come back in 2025 as LCS champions who almost beat Gen G. And then when a similar scenario comes up, are they just going to be the same personality that they were before? Are they going to like, you know, if Inspired calls out Masu, is he going to approach the feedback in the same way as he did when he was a rookie, now that he's a statured player? Like these are all things I'm thinking about. Like how do we make sure that our environment is durable? How do we evolve? Because it won't just be the same as it was halfway through Summer Split. Like thinking about how we can actually rectify some of the examples before, because I called it out in the AMA, but it's always, we went so far in Worlds because we could scrim against much better opposition. We had much better solo queue. How can I look past the year in North America and get back to this because this is what I want? How many times has that led to a team missing the international event and never getting to do it again? So if we're going to run it back, that looks like a safe choice, but I don't know how you feel about, both of you feel about GMing, but I actually think that making a roster change is way easier than keeping a roster together.
It is. That's why people do it, in my opinion. I've always said the real thing is you don't really solve the problem. What you hope is most of the problem was in the player you removed, so it's just gone, and you start with something else added. But obviously, yes. By the way, since you watched the Talk to Thorin, this is actually also one of the things people miss actually about Peter, how Peter Dunn built his teams. The reason his teams seem to get better over time and players would become better and better is because he would always do it with a 2-year runway. And the idea was year one's actually to build for the success to be on year two. It's not which everyone else is doing in esports. You've got 1 year. And in fact, like I said, sometimes you have a split. And if someone's doing badly, get them out there. Now it's become fashionable to do the mid-split hero, bring a guy in to save the team and turn the fortunes around. Also, by the way, one thing on what you were saying there as well is, first of all, that is a massive difference in mentality. I have known privately and publicly the North Americans who had the Worlds runs. And mate, some of them are literally the loser in the Denny's diner going, oh, and then there's one time I was in like game 4 and we could have won. And then they're like talking like they won the game, and like that's to them that it's like they didn't really think they ever did deserve to win the game. Whereas first of all, like I can tell you that is the difference of the elite Europeans, not just the normal BDS player. If you talk to Caps, he's not joking. He has actually woken up like in the middle of the night thinking, fuck, what would I do again if I was in that World's final? What would be different this time? He believes that's possible, whether anyone tells him that's delusional. And then secondly, here's why actually your team should think that way, even where maybe some of those others shouldn't. There's been teams who came close. Here's what I would say to the people from FlyQuest. Game 1 was literally against, in theory, spiritually, the best team of 2024, and that was a clean win. That wasn't like some crazy Baron flip or one of their players just inexplicably entered it out of a stupid team. That you just actually, from the beginning of the game to the end, you just battering them. Like that was actually like a statement game.
And I think I don't want to call out community narratives because like they're obviously on my side right now. Halfway through the year, around the Jensen period, you want to come out and be a disruptor, but it's your job to take it. The only community narrative that like I wish could be tweaked is this idea of like with Joker picks, like these off meta things, we could steal some games away, but that using that as like arming yourself with that as a bullet to like play down FlyQuest as a team. I will say like you could look at regular season and playoffs to see that that's not us. You could, be uncharitable and say like first rotating Axe Seraphine, then putting Seraphine mid. That was potentially a Joker pick, even if the game was overall clean. What I will say is at the top level, when you're playing against some of the best teams in the world, which were what we were scrimming, and then obviously we played Gen G, so quarterfinals onwards, you have to understand very, very well how the meta champion works, what its strengths are, why it's considered strong in the meta, in order to play a counter pick into it. Like you actually have to like understand on a very deep level why the meta is the meta, why it is infallible to be able to break it. And so we had to play a lot of games of meta champs. We weren't playing a lot of games of Nunu. We were playing way more games of the meta champions than Nunu to understand why the Nunu could be a new variable and why, the most famous moment, of course, is like fucking Thorin trying to teleport away from
not knowing that the Nunu
Nunu
Q roots him.
I'm not even joking. Bear in mind, Thorin, I always remind people, has won 4 of the last 5 LCK splits, which is an incredible accomplishment. The real reason T1 fans are bombed is they're all thinking of that moment, unfortunately. And that's in everyone's brain right now.
It's that and like his like Camille ints and things like that.
Yes.
But it's stuff like that where like you just to break a meta, you have to really fucking be good at playing it. Otherwise, okay, if you're stomping shitters, then no, like you can just play whatever you want. But like, let's assume we respect our opponents because we're at Worlds. You really have to understand the meta extremely well to be able to beat it. And it's like we knew the meta, we knew it wasn't going to work against Gen G, so we went ahead of the meta and tried to use all of the like strong fundamentals that we have as a team. Like if you look at our team in general, the way you would define us from I guess playoffs onwards is in the early game we take extremely greedy scaling comps like Ivern comps and things like that. While players are good, we try to minimize the amount of oopsies we make in the early game. And then we're a crack team fighting team. So eventually, when whoever hits the core items they need to hit, whether it's 3-item Ivern or 3-item ADC or whatever, we'll just outhands them. So as long as we didn't give up too much, we're going to win. Like that was like our read on how we were best in the meta as a 5-person with the meta as it was, playoffs onwards. Even though our players would love to play LPL style, Lucian Nami early game, we're like, this is the way we're going to win a title is doing this. And I think that's like that was just like what we surmised, and like clearly we're a very strong team fighting team, and that's something you have, like a cue you have in the rack, but you still have to like find out, okay, but like they're Gen G and they're a fucking good team fighting team in Korea. How are we gonna find a win? And ultimately it was Nunu and other attempts, and some of it worked, some of it didn't. But I think we were out of a bag of tricks. I will say that if we had won against Gen G, we didn't have any, like we would have had to use the next 4 days of scrims to create, because we put everything on the Rift. The set came out into
Well, I mean,
Rumble.
you gotta do it,
everything
man.
was there. We were naked at that point, you know. Like you guys saw the kitchen sink. I can't even think. The only thing we didn't play is like more niche 2v2 counter picks, but we didn't actually need them because like our ball lane was just fucking performing.
Yeah.
You know.
I think you really bring up a good point there that people are going to miss from this conversation about the history of North American League of Legends, which is that, so one of the problems was like, okay, so let's rewind in time 5-10 years, right? Having, as you say, Joker picks was not going to help NA teams win 5 years ago because they fundamentally sucked at macro and they didn't know what was going on in the meta, right? When we look at this last year, the impressive thing about LCS was that I legitimately believe that Team Liquid was one of the best macro teams in the entire world, right? And we would never have really said that about anybody in, LCS previously. Even teams like the original iteration of C9's roster were kind of, they were aping the Koreans.
It
And
was
they were
like good for a Western team, one of those ones.
Yeah.
Maybe Monty, this is like, there's no real way to like road test this worldwide, but like maybe CLG when they were like really ahead of the lane swap meta,
Sure.
like maybe that was a time where like if that was somehow an IEM around that time, like I feel like CLG was a really good lane swap team at that time.
Yeah,
So
and I mean, there were iterations of Western teams, like famously Moscow 5 early on, or G2 when they were winning MSI, that
that's like
were
the
legitimately.
that's almost prehistoric era. The
Sure.
Moscow 5 one.
No, but I think G2 recently, you could say that about
Yeah.
G2, within the past 5 years, 2019.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like there haven't been any instances, but I think especially to apply it, apply these learnings. Or like people might say, well, wouldn't the new equivalent have worked 5 years ago? And the answer is no. No, it wouldn't have. And I think you bring that point up. And I think it's good to talk about LCS's strengths in 2024 because they were legitimately in some aspects of the game world tier, right? So it's a different era.
By the way, this is obviously, I'll just do it as the loaded question. When you guys won Summer, obviously, if I'm in the TL camp, that's the easiest locker room bitch session of all time. It's like, nah, it's bullshit. The fucking minions are. If we played, we'd have beat them in game 5. Yeah, must have been nice to get that game, that elimination game, go to the playoffs or go home against TL and have the 2-1 series. That was kind of a chance to prove it was legit, right?
Yeah,
I'm sure they were horny as fuck to beat you guys, not just to make top 8, right?
So the draw there is like probably the thing that like to a man, every person would have a different reflection on.
Right.
I talked about it on Cagel's stream, but like I hated drawing TL in that match because it felt like a lose-lose from the org side. I get to be like one step removed from like I just want to win and they're the easiest team to beat, which is kind of like how Andrew should think about it, right? From the org side, if you think about the narrative, the two things you leave that match with are you only got through because you got a lucky draw.
Sure.
And then now you're playing a best of 5 against an Asian team. Let's assume, most people, like almost everybody, picked us to lose 3-0. If that had happened, it's like a false result, like it's like a false data point.
Yep.
We didn't even beat G2 like Energy had before crashing out in the quarters. And then on the other side, if we lost, then we had just kind of like taken over, like, because I know the stat was that we'd played against TL. It was like the second most times maps have been played between two opponents in like the history of League of Legends in 1 year. We played TL so many times. We played them like upper bracket, lower bracket.
All the BO5s, yeah.
So many times. And then we lose the org rivalry for the year, right? Because the last result is that, and you don't make quarterfinals. So it's like you're staring at that, being like, okay, what is the best result here? And it's like win and do something against the Asian team, which is like already like a huge, a multi-step process. So I think definitely it was a frustrating one. Obviously, like beating TL is a good org rivalry thing. I feel like it's only legitimized because of the quarterfinal. Like the only way we put
that is the narrative aspect. Sure,
we get the benefit of hindsight on that because we've pushed past, like we lose 3-0 and then the loudest voice is G2 being like, where the fuck was my draw kind of
exactly.
thing. The fact that we actually competed, that's where people are like, wait, I need to reevaluate some of my biases around this result. So that's the only way that we found an org win, I think, is like actually picking up those 2 games against Gen G.
Also, you have also pointed out an obvious flaw in the analytical lens there of just looking at the draw, which is you can simultaneously get 3 teams that are way more beatable, and you can be really good as well. It's just you didn't get the chance to actually show it in the same way. Yeah, that's obviously both can be true.
Yeah, I mean, look, Worlds now we get to look back on fondly. And again, a lot of the work now is on, okay, when we know the pieces we're coming in with next year, how do we set this up to actually kind of like push past it? I will say, like, a lot of teams are out in Korea boot camping right now. I think there's actually 4 LCS teams in Korea, at least they were recently. We're not. We are taking an extended break here. Obviously, we had almost no break, literally from
You had a
January
longer year than most of these teams.
Yeah, we didn't get any breaks, right? We went to EWC as well, so like we had
true.
we had legit no break. I think the players have had like 3 weeks off all year, between January 6th and like whatever it was, October.
And you said that you would do the
19th
boot
or
camp
whatever.
before the season even began, so they must have had an insane schedule.
That's why I gave the quote, but the most
Right.
amusing moment I had was right after we won LCS. Masu, I sat down with him and he was like, "So am I going on a Korean boot camp in November?" Because remember, this is all he knows is one of the things I like to like. I'm a very like the British commentators for the Olympics who like read into the emotion on the screen kind of vibe. I'm like, Masu's whole pro experience is this last year, like the most atypical year ever, where you attend all the international events, 2 LCS finals, quarterfinals of Worlds, leave Worlds with your head held high.
He
as
thinks
a
this is
North
a normal
American player.
year. Right.
But I mean, I don't know. I just know that that's all he knows, right? That's all he's
Sure.
got.
Sure.
And so like he was just like, "So am I back in Korea in November?" I was like, "Fuck no, you're taking a break. I need you to come back in rested in January."
I mean, look, I question the value of Korean boot camps in December before the new season of League of Legends has come out, considering how much the game changes in general. So, I mean, I don't think that sounds.
I've also heard of people who sadly did just think it was the panacea, just burned themselves up before the season even began. That's a real thing. That's a phenomenon. Oh, listen, it always plays well on Reddit to say the 3-week boot camp, but it doesn't, by the way, if suddenly halfway through the first split, you just burn to a crisp. Yeah, of course.
I mean, it's one thing we're thinking about a lot on the Counter-Strike side. Our Australian team has to go to Europe a lot. It's obviously an incredibly punishing flight.
Sure.
And we did our exit interviews after Shanghai, and there's a lot of like learnings around like how long a boot camp is effective. Like when does it become too long? What are the things you need to break up a boot camp? I think like the reflection we've had is 14 days feels too long, 10 days feels perfect. And if it's going to be more than 10 days, have some sort of like online cup or tier 2 or tier 3 like tournament to play to like keep yourself sharp. Because I can say from my reflections, whenever a team has to scrim for 3 weeks in a row with no pro games to play, which I guess was the teams that didn't go to EWC, 10, 11 days in, you lose which way is up and down. You like have fucking no idea. You need this,
that's what I heard from.
You need like a quiz, like a stage game is like a quiz versus like a playoff game is like a test. Like if you have no quizzes, you're just like, what the fuck even is going on?
That's what I've heard from the teams that go 3-0 in Swiss at Worlds is that the time period between when they qualify for quarters and it is that like 10, 11 day gap. And that actually really fucks them up because you just lose all track of, you're not tested. So you have no idea, like the meta can get really weird in your scrims and you have bad reads. And I've heard that.
Every team uses scrims differently. Like TL doesn't like scrimming us because we don't approach scrims like they do. Like TL is a very structured team, as you can expect, with a core JJ led team and a lot of Korean influence there. And we're playing Nunu or we're playing, like Fiddlesticks and things like that. And like you think about that and we're like, let's test this thing because we know what we are. We know what we want to move to. Let's test this thing because we don't need to test, front to back team fighting with the meta. So like we know what we're doing, and if we lose, like, that was stupid. Meanwhile, they're like, another fucking game of practice wasted with this bullshit pick we'll never play against. Like,
that's true.
The goals of the two teams are very different.
Well, you are kind of
when it comes to scrims.
Yeah, exactly, because you're hoping they play meta so that you can test your non-meta picks that may not work, and if they don't work, they won't see them. So like, kind of fuck you, honestly.
And the irony of course being, the team that used all the weird picks and got top 8 at Worlds, but the team that wanted to play meta bizarrely ran out of picks on some of their main carries.
It is.
Who could
it
have
is
known it,
funny that-
guys? Who could have known?
I definitely there was like moments during our world scrims, or we were scrimming against like a big team, whether it's like a top of their region team or an Asian team, and you're like 4 scrims in, and the opponent's banning like Nunu, Fiddlesticks,
Okay.
Set. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And then we're picking our 4th whack pick, and you're like, these guys are never scrimming against us again.
Sure.
I do
We're
want
like,
to
oh shit.
I do want to talk about obviously the LTA transition and everything like that. Focus more on the broader picture of North American League of Legends esports, which is relevant to your current job. Also, we'll talk about probably some Counter-Strike and the major stuff here just for funsies.
See more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or be a pleb and don't.